So let's speak briefly about this idea that the death of a beautiful woman is the most poetical of all the topics in poetry and how it came to life in Poe's works. The idea comes from his essay, The Philosophy of Composition, in which he supports the idea of the 18th century English poet Alexander Pope. I hope this name is familiar to you guys, who said that true poets are made, not born. Basically, what Poe says is that he was not suddenly inspired by a muse to write The Raven. He composed the poem in a very serious and methodical way, using quite deliberate images and sounds in order to create the effect that he wanted. Many readers of Poe and many critics of Edgar Allan Poe do not want to believe that the Raven was not an inspired piece of art, but it's not. It's actually quite deliberately made. So let me show you what I mean. Let's read one excerpt from the Philosophy of Composition together. Now, never losing sight of the object, supremeness, or perfection at all points, I asked myself, of all melancholy topics, what, according to the universal understanding of mankind, is the most melancholy? Death was the obvious reply. And when, I said, is this most melancholy of topics most poetical? From what I have already explained at some length, the answer here also is obvious, when it most closely allies itself to beauty. The death, then, of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world, and equally is it beyond doubt that the lips best suited for such topic are those of a bereaved lover. So he says, this is the way I chose the topic of Lenore's death to be the main topic of The Raven, and it should be pronounced by her lover who still mourns for her. So he takes The Raven as the example to show how writing of poetry in his example works. Then he says, these points being settled, I next bethought me of the nature of my refrain. It was clear that the refrain itself must be brief. This led me at once to a single word as the best refrain. And we know that the most famous refrain in The Raven is Nevermore, although it's not the only refrain, as you will see, because you will read The Raven with me in class when we will speak about the rhyme scheme, the choice of words, the rhythm, and of course the refrains as well as about some poetic devices that Poe uses. So he chose the refrain. The word nevermore did not come as an inspiration, but it was quite carefully chosen. Let's see how. The question now arose as to the character of the word. Having made up my mind to a refrain, the division of the poem into stanzas was of course a corollary, the refrain forming the close to each stanza. That such a close to have force must be sonorous and susceptible of protracted emphasis, admitted no doubt, and these considerations inevitably led me to the long O as the most sonorous vowel in connection with R as the most producible consonant. So, in a word, his refrain should contain an O sound and R sound. Okay, let's move on. In such a search, it would have been absolutely impossible to overlook the word nevermore. In fact, it was the very first which presented itself. So this word nevermore contains two R's, two R sounds, and I know it's quite appealing to read The Raven in British English because everything sounds better in British English, let's face it. But The Raven is a poem written by an American romantic, and it should be read out loud in American English so that we can hear all the R sounds in order to make the poem more melodic and more sonorous, which is Poe's advice to us, of course. He says we should read it as such. Here, then, the poem may be said to have had its beginning, at the end, where all works of art should begin. And now he gives us the stanza that he wrote first. So he did not start writing The Raven from the first stanza, but he first decided on the effect, and that was the effect of melancholy. Then he chose his topic, which is the death of a beautiful young woman. Then he said my narrator should be her lover, who is still sad. because of Lenore's death, and then he chose the refrain, nevermore. It is then that he wrote this stanza, which you can see in the slide, where he already addresses the raven now, saying that the raven is a thing of evil, he is a prophet sent by the devil himself, and he demands an answer whether he will ever embrace Lenore again. And the raven replies with his famous one word, nevermore. So this is the desired effect in the first stanza that Poe wrote when he was writing The Raven. The poem The Raven was an immediate success. It was published in 1845, and he did not make much money from The Raven. He only made some $9 for the poem, but it did make him famous. And especially after he explained how he composed it, The Raven became much more mysterious than it was before. And here are some other things that he said about it. I made the night tempestuous, first to account for the raven's seeking admission, so to explain why the raven wanted to enter the house, he had to have a storm. And secondly, for the effect of contrast with the serenity within the chamber. So outside it was tempestuous, and inside the house it was very calm and silent and serene. So this is a nice, beautiful contrast. I made the bird alight, or perch, on the bust of Pallas. Pallas is the Greek goddess of wisdom. Also for the effect of contrast between the marble and the plumage. The marble of the bust of Pallas is white, whereas the raven is a black bird. So there is another contrast between the black and the white. And of course, since Pallas is Athena, who was, as I said, the goddess of wisdom, we can, when we see the raven perching on Athena's bust, we immediately associate the raven with wisdom. In this way, using all these poetic devices and tricks, he achieves the unity of effect that he wanted from the start. And this term effect is, in Poe's mind, the most important thing that you can have in a poem. So, to sum it all up, he wanted to have the effect of melancholy, which he achieved mostly through his chosen refrain, nevermore, which is very effective because of the aw and r sounds in it, and because of the repetition of the refrain at the close of each stanza. Regarding the length, because The Raven is not such a long poem, but it is quite long. However, we can read it in one sitting. It takes about 8 to maximum 10 minutes to read The Raven in a very expressive voice. However, we will dedicate probably an hour to reading the poem. And this is what Poe said about the length of each poem. There is a distinct limit as regards length to all works of literary art, the limit of a single sitting. This means that a work of literary art, if it's quite valuable, should be read in a single sitting. Anything that requires weeks to be read is not that valuable, according to Poe, and this is why he wrote only one novel. You know that it takes a lot of time to read novels, and Poe dedicated himself to writing short tales and poems because he thought the effect would be lost if you were to read a piece of art in days to come. And I somehow secretly agree with him on this, because I would always choose a play or a short tale to read rather than a novel, unless it is a real page turner. Regarding the critical approach to The Raven, we will speak about that in class. I will not dwell at all on certain things that The Raven has to say. But the critics around the world have said that many of them paid much more attention to the bird instead of the poem. So The Raven, the bird, was actually quite more popular than The Raven, the poem. And this is not good, because the poem is actually something that gives us different meanings and different interpretations to think about and to become more aware of the topics that he wanted to explore. One such topic is, for example, the uncertainty of life after death. And you saw that this was the same topic that Poe dealt with in other poems as well, such as Lenore and Ulalu and Annabel Lee, for example. So this topic is also seen in the stanza that I already read to you, in which he says to the raven, "Tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore." So he is obsessed with not knowing what will happen after her death. But of course, there are so many things to speak about. So if you come to the class, you will see that by closely reading the Raven, we can take different meanings from it and in turn become richer and more experienced by the things Poe said in it. The poem itself is quite simple to read, and I'm looking forward to exposing and showing you many tricks of the trade that Poe used so that he could be able to compose the poem that resonates even today with the modern readers as it did with the readers of the 19th century America.